Hello everyone, Tech Gamer here. In today's video, I'd like to provide you with a brief technical breakdown of how controllers work for our modern video game consoles. On the left, we've got Nintendo. In the center, we've got Microsoft. And on the right, we have Sony. So let's start with the Nintendo line of controllers. Now these controllers are from a Nintendo Switch, and there are two different options. There are Joy-Cons, which you hold in each hand, and a standard Pro controller. Now, the Joy-Cons are two separate controllers that you can mount inside of a hand carry case like this to make one handheld, or you can hold them like this. The Pro controller is just your standard setup, same as the other consoles have, that everyone's been the accepted design over the years is two analog joysticks, a digital movement pad, and buttons. Same for the top as well. So the Joy-Cons are unique in that you can hold them like this. It was the first for Nintendo to make them this small, copying from the Wii design. But the principle is all the same. They have your standard analog joysticks, buttons on the top. This one has an infrared sensor, which is used for near-field communication. The Microsoft line of controllers for the Xbox Series X is basically the same as previous designs. Two analog joysticks, your digital movement, your usual buttons, and your interaction buttons. They have the same on the top, and a USB charging port. And that's a connection for headsets. The Sony line of controller for a PlayStation 5 is the same, basically, as the Microsoft one and the Nintendo Pro controller. You've got your two analog joysticks, your digital movement, digital buttons on the top, a charging port, and headset. So as you can see, the principle between all of them is all the same. They're really all just analog and digital inputs in a nice handheld form. So how do these various devices track our input and send it to the console? Here's how that works. Let's use, for demonstration purposes, the Sony controller. The Sony controller has two analog inputs and two digital inputs, plus more digital inputs on the top and bottom. Let's focus for a minute on the digital inputs. So there is movement inputs and button inputs. How these work are, they are all digital. So binary, 0 and 1. When you're not touching anything, the controller is going to constantly send a signal to the PlayStation that says, I'm not doing anything. That's usually a 0. When I press a button, whether it's any one of these buttons, it sends what's called an interrupt signal to the console. And now that interrupt signal usually consists of a binary 1, which says I've been pressed, plus some other little stuff in it that says, okay, you pressed up, or you pressed rectangle, X, circle, triangle. That's coding, comes with the binary interrupt signal. And that principle is all the same for our various controllers here. The technology has not changed in that regard. Analog controllers, the technology also hasn't changed. Now, these controllers are analog, which means that they're old-style joysticks in a modernized form. How they work, basically, is there is no digital inputs from them. It's all analog. How it works is they use things called a potentiometer or a magnometer to track the location of the stick. So when you move up, it knows you went up. When you move down, left, right. And it also tracks how fast you move it. So if I move it just a little bit, it knows that I moved it just a little and will send that command to the console, letting it know I'm moving just a little so that you can walk slowly. And then if you shoot it all the way to the right, you'll move quickly. How that works is through the technology of a potentiometer or a magnometer. Basically, around the joystick, there are sensors or resistors in the case of a potentiometer. It knows when you moved to the right because it basically interrupts the signal in some way, shape, or form, depending on which technology is used. And what it does is it senses, okay, direction and distance. So direction is important so that when we move it right, we know it turns right. When we go a little bit, it knows that we've moved just a little bit. So basically, it assigns a number. 0 is in the center, 100 is all the way to the right, and then there's little numbers in between. Obviously, if you go halfway, it's 50. And analog can do that because of the nature of how it works. It basically, if you've ever seen a radio signal, it's the up and down hills. Those hills get adjusted based on the electrical inputs being manipulated by moving these controllers around. So that's great. We've got analog input. When I move to the right and this way, I expect my character to turn right really fast. But how does the console understand analog? Because consoles, as we know, are all digital, cannot understand analog. Built into these devices are converters that essentially converts the analog sine wave to a digital sine wave. So again, analog is the up and down hills. Digital is up and down, basically, blocks. And those blocks get adjusted in height and distance into digital. So once the signal is converted to digital, it's then sent over to the console, either via a wire or wireless. That is why you have that slight delay when you use video game controllers. There's not a lot of ways around that. Now that delay has become minimal over the years. Again, this technology, analog controllers, digital buttons, has not changed much. You look at PC joysticks, Atari joysticks from the past, the principle is all the same. I have here an old Nintendo controller to show you. The principle is the same as the modern ones. You've got digital inputs and you've got buttons. These buttons all just send interrupt signals through the wire back to the console. That technology has not changed at all in the years gone by, as you can see. One of the things I don't like about the controllers is the fact that they do use analog joysticks. Now, the PlayStation and the Xbox have been pretty good in that regard, in their design and overall, and also these systems haven't been out long enough yet to get a good judgment about the quality of them. Who knows in a couple of years how well these will still work. Right now, you don't hear too much about these issues. One of the things you have heard a lot about over the years is Nintendo's Joy-Con drift. So how that basically works is over the years, from going like this all the time, moving this around, pushing it hard, the internal guts of these controllers wears out. And it's really a poor quality build is really what it boils down to. And what happens is when the controller's in the center, it's not actually in the center. It thinks it's over like this. So in turn, your guy will start spinning in a circle, moving forward, or just getting stuck. And to stop it, you have to put it to the opposite of what the issue is. So if your guy has the Joy-Con drift of moving forward and he's just constantly moving, you'd have to hold it down a little bit to stop it. Now, I've run into that issue on one Joy-Con, and I was able to fix it by recalibrating through the Switch console, and that went away. But there are people that have to send them in to Nintendo to be fixed, or they make third-party kits where you can open the console controller and replace the actual mechanical components of the Joy-Con, which is essentially replacing the potentiometer. The Xbox Series controller, I find it has a pretty comfortable feel to it. The one thing I do not like is for a $500 console, AA batteries power the controller. Now, to Microsoft's part, they do make a lithium-ion pack you can get, but in my opinion, that should have been standard. As if you look at the competitors, such as Sony, no battery pack. It's built in. It's a lithium-ion battery. Same thing for the Nintendo Pro Controller and the Joy-Cons for that matter. There is no battery. They're all built in, and they charge via the various ports, or in the case of the Joy-Cons, on the dock. So that is one thing I do not like about Nintendo. I found that to be very disappointing, that the Joy-Cons were so poorly designed in terms of mechanical, and I think that was purely a cost-saving measure. Nintendo, if you look at their overall build, it's okay, the Switch, the dock, but the Joy-Cons, I feel they just really kind of cheaped out on to save money in this regard. Just the overall feel of them is a little... Hopefully the future consoles, if there ever is a Switch Pro, fixes that, but I doubt it. The Xbox controller, I like the feel, like I said, but the AA battery thing is a real negative point on Microsoft's part. It's really just purely a cost-saving measure. For a $500 console, you should get lithium-ion batteries inside of a controller, I'm sorry. The PlayStation one, I think, is the best quality of all, just because I like the way it looks. And again, just the overall feel and the built-in battery. So as you can see here, that was a brief overview of the controllers from a more of a technical point of view. Again, to recap, these controllers are all really just nothing but analog and digital inputs that send what you do to your consoles. And with the overall goal of interaction, you've got your analog joysticks, your digital inputs, your top and bottom buttons. They all have built-in accelerometers and gyroscopes so that it knows which way you're holding it. And if you ever were to drop it down, it compensates for that as well. The Joy-Cons are a unique design from Nintendo in that they are handheld. So they act as two controllers versus one, but you can also mount them inside of a holder like this. So that's it for this video. I hope everyone liked the brief overview I provided here. If anyone has any questions, please leave a comment, or if there's anything you would like to see, let me know and I will make that happen. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, everyone.